Hey there, thanks for catching up with us on this video, part two of talking about growth and taxes. Now, we're going to be talking about the tax implications that typically fall with each one of these type of accounts. Now, there's going to be some exceptions, and so I ask you to bear with me in understanding that there are some exceptions to these. It's not a guaranteed fixed, set in stone type of a thing, but let's go over the details of how these accounts are typically taxed, and I'll bring up some of those exceptions. So most of your fixed rate type of accounts, these are going to be in what we would put into our tax now bucket. So we're going to be talking about three different buckets of money, or three different ways that these accounts are taxed. So what this means is, let's say that you've got your money in your savings account and that you get, maybe you've got a killer savings account and you get 1% growth on that. So come next tax season, you got that 1% growth, the IRS is going to tax you right then. So this is going to be taxed now. So your savings, CDs, bonds, those are all going to fall into here, typically speaking. Savings, CDs, and if you've just outright purchased a bond, then that's going to be typically taxable at your current rates. Now, if you're holding a bond within your 401k or your IRA, let's talk about how that works. So most of Americans, they hold their variable investments inside your 401k, your IRA, and other similar financial vehicles. Now, these are going to fall into what we're going to call the tax later bucket. The technical term for this is tax deferred or deferred taxes, that these are in the tax later bucket. So we're postponing paying taxes at a later date so that we don't have to pay taxes on it right now. And typically, as you put money into these accounts, you also get a tax benefit, right now, during your working years or whatever phase of life you're in. So this is kind of how the tax later thing works. Now, if you're holding stocks or bonds inside a 401k or inside an IRA, then those are going to be taxed later. But if you just outright purchased a bond or a stock with your post-tax, dollars that have already been taxed, then that's typically the growth of that's going to be taxed right then. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, the third bucket, which is my personal favorite that we're going to talk about, is the tax never again bucket. So hopefully you can read that. Is the tax never again bucket. So what we mean by this is that once you put money into this bucket, when you pull that money out, when you do it correctly, when you do it within parameters, then the IRS cannot touch your money anymore. And so these accounts are super awesome. And really there's only two financial vehicles that actually qualify for this type of taxation approach. And that's a Roth IRA. So a Roth IRA. And then the other thing is life insurance. Typically permanent life insurance. So once we put money into this bucket, as long as it's all structured correctly and we follow the rules, it can never again be taxed. And so in the next video, we're going to talk about the impact of taxes and how this relates to what we're talking about here. So I feel like this is one of the most powerful buckets that you can be using as far as protecting yourself against future taxation, because we can't control what the IRS does. We don't have, we can't call up the IRS and be like, hey, I'm displeased about my tax bill, I want you to lower it. It's not really how it works, right? We can't do that. So understanding that we do have the option, because these two things, gosh, like most investors and most people, they have no idea that these even exist, because quite honestly, it's in the best interests of the big banks and big financial institutions and Wall Street to just only tell you about these type of options, because that's where they can make money. The bank loves, you to have money in a savings account or to buy a CD at 1%, because what are they doing? They're turning around and using that money that you got tied up in a CD, and they are loaning that money out at 3 and 4 and 5% or higher. And so they're making more than 100% return on your money. It's not even their money. That's one of the crazy things and mentality shifts that we're going to talk about, is that banks, if they can help it, they do not want to own assets. Like if a bank has to take, say, a repossession of a house or of a car, they don't like that. That's like a failure on their part. They do it as, worst case scenario type of thing because that was the collateral, but they don't want to own assets. They just use your money to make more money. It's an ingenious system that we'll talk more about and how you can use that to your advantage in future videos. But banks try to avoid using their own funds. And then by that same token, Wall Street, when you play in the variable market, you can make some fantastic money. But by that same token, typically when you're making fantastic money, that means that somebody else is losing on the opposite end of the spectrum. And so trying to beat the market, you can read books from one book that I would encourage you to read is the Little Book of Financial Common Sense. I'll have to post that. I'm probably butchering the title there, but by John Bogle or Jack Bogle, and he is the grandfather of indexed investing, which is a little bit different than what we've talked about here, but he's created like the Vanguard Mutual Index Fund, which if you're going to be playing in the variable market, that's the way to do it because you're buying the market as a whole. We'll talk more about that in other videos, but understand that if you try and beat Wall Street at their own game, you're not going to win. You may have one or two short-term wins, but in the long term, you're not going to win. It's kind of interesting. Warren Buffett has made a bet with some hedge fund managers to where if they can consistently beat the market for 10 years, it's a small bet to Warren Buffett, but it'll pay him $1 million. $1 million bet to where if they can make and beat the market for 10 years, so far no one's been able to take him up and get that $1 million because it's just very difficult to beat the market long run. You might get lucky a couple of times, but in the long run, if you're going to be playing in the variable markets, we want to be in indexed mutual funds. So these are the taxation and the different ways where your accounts can grow. In the next video, we'll take a little bit deeper dive into taxes and help you understand how that works. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time.